Afternoon. We are so excited to hear your testimony today. My name is Tammy Waller, and I'm the Director for K-12 Social Studies and World and Native Languages at the Arizona Department of Education.
Good afternoon. My name is Lynn Simons, and I'm a state district court judge in Washoe County, Nevada. And I'm going to ask all of you to take a very deep breath right now.
My name is Murray Snow. Nice to meet you all. I am the Chief Judge for the Federal District Court in Arizona.
And we'd love for you to introduce yourselves.
Hi, judges. It's nice to meet you all. My name is Hope Hutchinson, and my favorite non-governmental organization is the Equal Justice Initiative for their work towards prison reform.
Hello, my name is Gabe Smeads, and my favorite non-governmental organization is Food for the Hungry for their humanitarian relief work as well as sustainable development projects.
Hello, judges. My name is Shelby Williams, and my favorite non-governmental organization is UNICEF for its work towards the welfare of children. And on behalf of Unit 6, Tahoma High School, our advisor Gretchen Wolfing, and the state of Washington, we greatly thank you for judging us today.
Excellent. So we are doing Unit 6, what challenges might face American constitutional democracy in the 21st century. Question 2. President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist." Do you agree or disagree? Why? What disagreements did the founders have about a standing army, and are they relevant today? To what extent should there be an international U.S. military presence? You may begin.
We must learn to compose differences, not with arms, but with intellect and decent purpose. Dwight D.
President Eisenhower, in his final speech as president, warns the American citizens of the dangers of the military-industrial complex, which he refers to as the joining of an immense military establishment and the new large arms industry.
We agree with Eisenhower's stance of concern towards the military-industrial complex.
Eisenhower argues that the complex will place too high of an importance on the military and that a large standing army is not needed as it funnels resources away from necessary projects such as hospitals and schools.
The dangers of the military-industrial complex are more prevalent today than in Eisenhower's presidency. In the words of former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, does the number of warships we have really put America at risk when the U.S. battle fleet is larger than the next 13 navies combined?
Eisenhower was warning that overspending for an inactive military could lead to the citizens losing control of the military-industrial complex. In 2019, defense spending alone reached $732 billion, more than the following 10 countries combined.
With current allies and trends, the budget for weaponry cannot be justified, as overspending has high potential for misplaced power within the military-industrial complex.
Many founders opposed a large standing army, similar to the existing armed forces today, due to the fear of tyranny.
Thomas Jefferson believed that a strong national military would become overbearing, leading to corruption and tyrannical rule over dissenting citizens. He felt strongly that standing armies were inconsistent with the individual freedoms and were a juxtaposition to the fundamental ideals that America was built upon.
However, Jefferson believed that an army could work successfully if citizens felt it upon themselves to act in civic duty in times of war.
In the opposite, John Adams had a differing view, favoring a strong standing army and navy, modeled after America's European counterparts. He believed that a strong standing army would not only deter possible war, but also put the country in a proactive war stance.
We recognize Jefferson's views on the worries of a large military, however, argued that his views on a civic duty-based military would not be feasible in today's society, as most citizens would not take it upon themselves to join the forces without incentive, and the government cannot force them to volunteer.
Adams' views are more applicable to today's society, as a strong military presence within the United States has been helpful for its citizens.
After 9/11, the United States military preparedness was essential in the original response and the ensuing conflict with Afghanistan and the mission for Osama bin Laden. The strong military presence that America maintained at the time has been necessary in times of attack or invasion.
On multiple occasions, overbearing U.S. intervention has been more harmful than beneficial, both to other countries and to U.S. citizens.
A prime example of international military backfiring being the conflict in Afghanistan. Over a 9-year period, an estimated 1 million citizens have been killed, as well as 18,000 Afghan troops. The United States military involvement in Afghanistan has continually disappointed and shows very little progress of its goal of defeating al-Qaeda and creating a Western-style democracy.
Instead, we argued that the US military presence should aim to ensure diplomacy and democracy, only being used when the US or its allies are being threatened or when foreign nations ask directly for American intervention.
The U.S. military presence in Operation Tomochichi, a $90 million disaster relief mission for Japan after the deadly earthquake and tsunami in 2011, succeeded in bringing relief during a humanitarian crisis. From this, repairs and rescues were made within Japan, and the connection between the United States and Japan was strengthened.
In addition, the US military presence was helpful in creating the 1948 Marshall Plan. From the Marshall Plan, NATO was created to unify and strengthen Western allies and protect the freedom of its members, allowing the United States to act as a superpower simultaneously.
Although there are good intentions, the negative outcomes of US intervention largely outweigh the positive and ultimately set the country back.
We can do fine actions even if we do not rule earth and sea. For even for moderate resources, we can do actions that accord with virtue. Aristotle.
Thank you. So for my question, I'm going to go back to the beginning of your presentation, and I'm going to ask you, if you had the ear of a congressperson, what reforms would you suggest for the military-industrial complex?
If I was in that position of power, I would argue that there should be a limited spending amount that lobbyist groups can give into the military industrial complex. Through Citizens United versus FEC, we see this kind of loophole where big corporations such as Lockheed Martin are able to go in and affect these huge affect Congress people in their agendas. And that's because they're these huge lobbyist organizations that create jobs across our nation, but aren't necessarily necessary at the time if they're creating weapons if we're not in a time of war.
To expand on my colleague, I would argue that as a congressperson, they should argue that the military and defense spending should be decreased, as the spending for the Department of Defense is around $700 billion, whereas spending for the entire military is nearing almost $1 trillion a year, accounting for around roughly 4% of our global or our national GDP, which is much too large for our military, being that we do not have immense active ongoing operations.
I would like to see the military truly divert its funds to more important causes and issues. As Eisenhower stated himself, he was worried that the military industrial complex would cause military spending to become too large. And he said himself that he would like to see military spending be diverted to hospitals and schools. And we've seen his worries really come true in this day and age.
I'd like to turn to the international military presence. I heard you say that we should aim to only use it when an ally is in need or when someone specifically or country asks for help. So if we turn to the complexity of the Spratly Islands in the South China Seas, as an example, what are the positive or negative aspects of US military presence there?
Like any national military base, the United States military base within other countries can allow for diplomacy as well as some ideals of democracy to be perpetuated onto other citizens. When a United States military presence goes ahead and implements a military base, that country can receive financial compensation for troops being stationed there. So I would say that that in itself could be a benefit for United States troops being stationed there.
However, to expand on my colleague Hope, we've seen where the United States has gone into other countries, aiming to really help and get rid of the struggles of that country. But instead, we weren't really requested and we weren't needed. And in turn, struggle rose. In the 1920s, the United States entered into Lebanon under a coalition with Italy and Britain. And they were aiming to aid in struggles with Iraqi powers within Lebanon. But instead, Lebanon themselves stated that they weren't ready for our help and really didn't want us. And in turn, the United States became a target and a US fighter plane was shot down. So the United States should truly aim to go into countries where our help is really requested in order to not harm these countries and promote peace.
To elaborate on both of my colleagues, I would argue that this is already a very complex issue, and being the difference in political ideologies that we have with many of those Eastern and Southeastern countries, I believe that U.S. intervention would cause much more harm than it would benefit, as it could create and elevate tensions between these countries.
Should we have gone into Pakistan to get bin Laden?
I would argue that the United States military presence within Afghanistan initially was justified, but over this period of almost 20 years, we've seen that it's increasingly gone down. Military troops being stationed there currently take up more troops than the United Nations have combined. And so we see that that's a taking out resources from what we use in our nation today. But with President Biden recently announcing that he will be trying to eradicate troops this year of 9/11, the 20-year anniversary of the incident, we can see that we're moving towards a shift in which we might see military troops coming back, and we can see this regain of faith within the United States military.
To whom or what does the Constitution, or in whom or what does the Constitution vest authority over the military? And is that a sufficient to prevent the abuse of military power?
We can see that in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 12, the Congress and legislative branch has power over the military, calling for an act to be passed every 2 years for sufficient funding for the military. And I believe that this is not enough to control our military, as it simply regulates funding and does not regulate leadership, nor where and what the military does and accomplishes besides acts of war.
I would like to expand on my colleague and draw attention to Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 of our Constitution, and that allows no state without the consent of Congress to go ahead and make an alliance with another state or with a foreign power. And that creates a sort of checks and balances system that we can see today, making sure that Congress really goes in and justifies those actions being taken, and we're not seeing one state trying to secede or work with foreign powers that might be harmful to the United States as a whole.
I too would like to disagree with my colleague Gabe, as I believe that, and also take a stance that these clauses within the Constitution are sufficient, as it does provide a checks and balances within directing war powers. Although it isn't controlling funding, it is directing our actions.
Okay. Should the National Guard be deployed domestically, and if so, under what circumstances?
I would argue that there are some circumstances in which the National Guard should go ahead and be deployed. One of these instances that we saw recently was the insurrection at the Capitol. I fully believe and would argue that the National Guard was needed there, as there were citizens posing a threat to congressmen and women, and also citizens of Washington, D.C., as they were going and taking firearms and also trying to storm the Capitol. And that's when the National Guard would be needed, when it's a direct threat to citizens within our state, or if there has been a local terrorist attack.
I would like to further my colleague Hope's statements and agree, saying that it should only be in certain cases. We've seen that just this past summer, we were in sort of a new modern day civil rights movement with the current Black Lives Matter protests. And may I finish my statement, please? With the Black Lives Matter protests, but the National Guard was deployed at the drop of a pin when it came to peaceful protests. And we even saw that 89% of protests that started peacefully, once the police arrived and once the National Guard arrived, then became non-peaceful and instructed even more violence that really wasn't necessary.
Thank you. Nice job. I really enjoyed your conversational style. You had lots of stuff to say, but you didn't just like very quickly shout it out at us. You had a conversation with us. You were thoughtful in your responses. I also liked the way you were able to work off of each other as you answered the questions, and listen to the questions before you jumped into them. I think you did a really great job. If I were to give you one suggestion moving forward, I would say to make sure that in with the questions, work on preparing some different like pros and cons of the questions. So you have that dichotomy between what each of you have said, but I thought you guys did a great job with it. And you really did address that on the last question. So good job.
I echo my colleagues' comments. I thought your pace was excellent. It just was so professional, and I believed that I was, in Congress listening to you as experts. One of the couple of constructive criticism would be to always look at the issue from both sides, similar to what Ms. Waller said. But for instance, at least in Nevada, we are utilizing our National Guard for all of our vaccines. And so it's kind of shift the paradigm. And the other is to always remember about the Navy, because the South China Seas is really a naval issue. And so that's the other thing in your mind, that you have your position, but always check and balance it. And that's pretty picky of what I'm saying, but I thought overall you had an excellent presentation. Just enjoyed the flow. I could have sat here for, another hour talking with you about all this.
I too enjoyed the presentation. I like the Adams-Jefferson juxtaposition. I don't know if it was intentional, but Adams and Jefferson were pretty much antagonists about almost everything. And in my view, Adams wins every time, and I think he wins this time too. But Jefferson is certainly a bright light in many ways. But I enjoyed that. I thought that was fun. I liked it when Shelby disagreed with Gabe. Actually, I thought Gabe gave some pretty good insight in the fact that Congress's power of the purse over the military is a pretty significant power. And he cited the constitutional section, he cited the power, he knew what it was. Shelby sort of, at least to me, suggested that she disagreed, not because she disagreed with his citation of the power, but that it could be very effectively used to control the military. And I end up agreeing with both of you. So I think that you did supplement each other in a very nice way. Couple of things you could have been maybe just a bit more directly responsive rather than talking around the answer sometimes. But I enjoyed the presentation very much and had a fun time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.